I never thought that waking up to a rustling sound at 2 a.m. would end up being the moment my whole world shattered. At first, I thought it was the wind. I almost rolled over and went back to sleep. But then I heard the drawers being pulled open, the sharp, desperate sound of metal handles clattering against wood. From the dark corner of my room, I saw him, my own son, hunched over my old mahogany dresser, his fingers trembling as he pulled out papers and envelopes. He was so focused, so frantic, he didn't even hear me shift. Then I saw it in his hands. The house deed. My house. The only thing I had left from my husband. After all the sacrifices and lonely nights. The only place I felt safe. The only place I called home. In that moment, the air left my lungs. I pressed my palm against my mouth, forcing myself to stay silent. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. He held that deed like it was a golden ticket. I watched him tuck it into his coat, his shoulders shaking. From excitement or guilt, I couldn't tell. I felt a sharp, cold stab in my chest. My own flesh and blood, the baby I nursed through fevers and night terrors, now rummaging through my memories and my trust like a common thief. I wanted to step forward, to shake him, to demand an answer, but I couldn't move. I was too afraid of what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't borrowing it. He was stealing it. 1,000 thoughts screamed inside me. How did it come to this? Did I make him too comfortable? Was I too forgiving all those years? I thought of all the times I'd given in, thinking love meant sacrifice. I stood there long after he left, staring at the empty drawer. I kept thinking of all the times I had defended him, to neighbors, to my friends, even to myself. All the times I'd said, "He's a good boy, just misunderstood. He's going through a rough patch." But that night, under the moonlight spilling across my bedroom floor, I realized the truth I had been too afraid to face. I was nothing more than a convenience to him. If he thought he could take my home, my dignity, and leave me empty, he was in for a reckoning he'd never forget. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his hands, those same hands I once held crossing the street, rifling through my most private drawers like I was already gone. By the time the sun started to creep over the horizon, I felt like a ghost in my own skin. My limbs felt heavy, my mouth dry as if I'd swallowed ashes. But I still got up. I still went to the kitchen, like I had done every morning for decades. Before I started breakfast, I forced myself to walk into my bedroom and open the drawer he had rifled through. I ran my fingers over the papers, flipping through them slowly. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. The envelopes looked as if they hadn't been touched, the folders stacked neatly in place. But my hands hesitated over the deed folder, and my stomach twisted. Why was it here if he had taken it? I scanned it again, each page crisp, every seal intact. On the surface, everything was exactly where it should be. Yet, as I stood there, a cold, crawling suspicion wrapped around my spine. Maybe he had made copies. Maybe he had already started moving things in ways I couldn't see yet. I forced myself to make breakfast. My hands trembled as I cracked the eggs, the shells shattering into tiny pieces that stuck to my fingers. I thought of all the mornings I'd woken up early to make him pancakes on his birthday, or the times I'd packed him lunches when he was too embarrassed to ask for money at school. I heard his footsteps coming down the hallway. My heart dropped into my stomach, but I kept stirring the eggs, kept pretending. He walked in humming, a stupid, off-key tune, like he didn't just rip out the last good thing I believed about him. "Morning, Ma," he chirped, sliding into his seat. His voice, that same sweet voice that once called me Mommy in the middle of the night when he had nightmares, now felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I set a plate in front of him, managing a shaky smile. "Morning," I croaked, my voice sounding foreign to me. He didn't even look at me. He just dug into the food, like a king expecting to be served. I watched his hands, the same ones that touched my deed, now shoveling scrambled eggs into his mouth without a care in the world. Inside, I was screaming. Every bite he took felt like another betrayal, another spit in my face. But I didn't let it show. I nodded when he asked for more salt. I poured him coffee. I even laughed at some mindless joke he told about a TV show. Because I knew, if I confronted him now, he'd spin some story, gaslight me, twist my own love against me. He'd lie so easily, I might even start questioning my own eyes. Instead, I decided in that moment, I would collect evidence. I would act like the naive, gentle mother he believed me to be. Let him underestimate me. Let him think he won. After breakfast, he left without a second glance. The door slammed so casually behind him, as if I were just another piece of old furniture. For so long, I had believed love meant sacrifice. I had swallowed every slight, every insult, thinking patience would save us. But that morning, I finally saw the truth. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a maid, an ATM, a silent servant. I closed my journal and pressed it to my chest. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. After he left, I sat alone in the sunlit kitchen, the journal still warm in my hands. The morning light spilled through the curtains, hitting the chipped tiles. I had scrubbed so many times my knees went numb. I looked around and saw every sacrifice staring back at me, the cracked mug on the counter from the year my husband died, the small stool by the sink, so my son could stand beside me and help wash vegetables when he was little. The faded photographs taped to the fridge, his missing front teeth, his first day of school, his first clumsy drawings. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was every piece of my heart, every breath I gave up to keep him warm and fed. After my husband passed, I fought like a wild animal to hold on to this place. I juggled cleaning jobs, cooked for neighbors, even mended old uniforms just to scrape together the mortgage. I remembered the winter I pawned my wedding ring so I could pay the heating bill. He was only 10 then, sick with the fever so high, I thought I would lose him. I sat by his bed all night, sponging his forehead, whispering, "Stay with me, you're all I have left." I thought that was love, and maybe it was, back then. But now, as I looked at the empty doorway where he had just stood, the kitchen felt more like a museum of my mistakes. I realized I had let every slight slide because I was too afraid to lose him. I let him turn selfish because I believed unconditional love meant unconditional forgiveness. After feeling like I was floating in a fog, I forced myself out of the house. I needed air that didn't smell like betrayal. I ended up at the local library, a place I hadn't stepped into in years. It was strange. Walking past the rows of books, the hush of whispered conversations, the slow turning of pages. It felt safe in there, like the world had slowed down enough for me to think without the weight crushing my chest. I sat down at a dusty table by the window and just stared outside for a long time. The library cat, an old tabby with a torn ear, curled up on the windowsill. Even he looked freer than I felt. I didn't notice the woman at the next table until she cleared her throat softly. She was older than me, hair pulled back into a tight bun, reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She looked like someone who had been through storms but learned how to stay dry. "You look like you're about to dissolve," she said, her voice surprisingly kind. I tried to laugh it off. "I guess I just have a lot on my mind." She didn't pry, just nodded knowingly. Sometimes the mind is too small to carry all the pain we try to shove into it. We sat in silence after that, but somehow it felt comforting. Eventually, I admitted, in a small, cracked voice, that I was worried about losing my home, about the son who had become a stranger. She didn't gasp or pity me. Instead, she leaned in and said, almost conspiratorially, "I used to be a paralegal, retired now, but I still know a few things. If someone's trying to steal from you, even if it's family, you can fight back, quietly. You don't have to scream to be strong." My head snapped up. "But he's my son. I don't want to destroy him." Her eyes softened, but her mouth set in a firm line. "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is show someone the consequences of their cruelty. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop allowing it." She scribbled something on a slip of paper and slid it toward me. "A lawyer who actually cares about these cases. Discreet. Smart. Not the kind who'll drain you dry. You should at least talk to him. My fingers hovered over the paper. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. It was the first time in weeks that I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. A flicker of power. Before she left, she put her hand over mine and squeezed it lightly. Document everything. Every paper. Every word. You're stronger than you think. I clutched that slip of paper all the way home, as if it were a lifeline. When I got back, I locked myself in my bedroom, pulled out my floral journal again, and started making lists. What was missing? What he might try next? Who I could trust? My hands still trembled, but my mind felt sharper. For the first time, I felt the old me, the woman who once fought through bills and funeral debts, who cooked soup when she had nothing but bones and onions, start to wake up. I might have been too forgiving before, but that was over. A few days later, I found myself at the small community center on the edge of town. I told everyone I was going there for free knitting classes. The truth, I slipped into one of the workshops on elder fraud prevention. I sat in the back, hidden behind the potted ficus, my pen shaking as I took notes. They talked about forged signatures, power of attorney abuses, quiet title lawsuits, things I had only heard in passing before. It felt like they were speaking directly to me, each word pushing me closer to some new version of myself. I pretended I was just a curious old lady asking questions about scams. Oh, just wondering how these things happen, I'd say with a polite smile, my voice all sweetness and air. Nobody suspected a thing. On the bus ride home, my mind was a thunderstorm. For the first time, I realized how fragile my safety really was. How easily a person can lose everything if they're too trusting, too eager to believe the best in people, especially the people they love most. When I got home, I went straight to the old file cabinet in my bedroom. It had been a while since I checked it. I opened it slowly, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. At first glance, everything looked the same, but as I ran my hands through the folders, I noticed gaps. Papers slightly out of order. A document that was usually behind my husband's death certificate had been moved. My fingers paused over the manila envelope labeled House Deed Original. It felt thinner than it should have. I sat on the floor, my knees creaking as I pulled out each folder. My hands worked mechanically, but inside, I felt like I was splitting open. When did he start? How long has he been planning this? I started jotting everything down in my floral journal. Missing documents, dates of odd behavior, words he said that didn't make sense before. The pages filled up fast, ink smudging where my tears fell. After that, every evening before bed, I'd sit in my rocking chair, journal in my lap. Sometimes, I just stared at the pages, tracing the words with my fingers. Each line felt like a small armor piece, something I could hold when I felt my knees buckle under the weight of betrayal. At night, when the house was quiet and he thought I was asleep, I listened for any new noises, any creak of the floorboards. I trained my ear like a soldier in enemy territory. One evening, I heard him on the phone, whispering in his room. "She won't fight back. She never has. We'll finish the paperwork next week, and then the house is mine. The house is mine." Those words played over and over in my head as I sat alone in the dark, my arms wrapped tight around my middle. I wasn't just a naive old woman anymore. I was learning, watching, preparing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt dangerous. And I had to act quickly. I sat in my rose garden that evening, long after the sun had slipped beneath the horizon. The petals glowed faintly under the porch light, their edges soft and forgiving, unlike the thoughts swirling inside me. My husband used to say that roses were like people. The most beautiful ones hid the sharpest thorns. I used to laugh and say he was being dramatic. But tonight, I finally understood. I traced the rough edges of a wilted petal with my fingertip and felt my chest tighten. My whole life, I had been pruning myself down, cutting away parts of me to make room for his comfort, his pride, his needs. Always careful not to overshadow him, always choosing silence over conflict, patience over pride. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to be soft to be good. I didn't have to keep letting my kindness be used like a doormat. I pressed my palm flat against my chest and whispered into the dark, "No more." A single tear slid down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. It felt important to let it fall, like a final offering to the version of me I was leaving behind. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how ugly it might get. But one thing was clear. I was done losing pieces of myself for someone who saw me as nothing but a stepping stone. Even if it meant facing shame or loneliness, I would reclaim my dignity. Because quiet doesn't mean weak. The next morning, I left the house early, before he could ask where I was going. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs, but I kept my steps steady. I clutched the slip of paper the retired paralegal had given me at the library, feeling the ink smudge under my damp fingers. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go home and pretend nothing was happening. But I kept walking. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, my breath caught in my throat. It was a small building on a quiet side street. Nothing flashy, just a brass plate on the door with his name. Inside, it smelled like old books and strong coffee. He was older than I expected, hair graying at the temples, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. He stood when I walked in, offered me a seat, and waited patiently as I tried to find my voice. I didn't start with pleasantries. I took a deep breath and slid the original documents across his desk, the copies I had carefully hidden away years ago. My deed, my old bank records, letters from the mortgage company, every scrap of paper that proved this house was mine. As he sorted through them, my hands twisted in my lap, my nails biting into my skin. Finally, he looked up and nodded, slow and deliberate. "You've done the hardest part already," he said softly. "You kept the original safe. That's everything." I felt my shoulders slump in relief I didn't know I was holding on to. He explained things clearly, step by step. He'd secure the deed first, file notices to prevent any transfer attempts. Then he'd prepare evidence of forgery and unauthorized tampering. He warned me it would be slow, and there would be moments I'd doubt everything, but he promised he'd handle it with care. I signed papers with shaking hands, each stroke of the pen feeling like a nail driven into the old version of me. When I finally stood to leave, he handed me a small folder and said, "Start putting together any suspicious messages. Emails, texts, anything odd," he said. "Keep copies. Bring them to me when you're ready." I nodded, clutching the folder like it was a newborn baby. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window and realized for the first time in a long time, I had a secret. A power he didn't know I held. When I walked through the front door, he barely looked up from his phone. "Out shopping again? Did you get my favorite coffee?" he mumbled. I forced a small, sweet smile. "Of course," I said. "I'll make it for you now." He had no idea I had spent the morning laying the first bricks of a fortress he would never break through. While he scrolled and smirked, imagining his easy victory, I moved around the kitchen quietly, brewing his coffee. Inside, I felt a quiet, cold determination, hardening like steel. He thought I was out there knitting and gossiping. Let him keep thinking that. Because every day, with every copied message and every note in my floral journal, I was becoming someone he wouldn't even recognize. A week later, he came home with a smirk on his face that immediately set my teeth on edge. He swaggered into the kitchen like a conqueror, returning from battle, tossing his keys on the counter so loudly they clanged against my favorite ceramic bowl, the one bought when he was born. "Ma," he called, stretching the word out, dripping with false affection. "I've got some great news for you." I wiped my hands on my apron slowly, steadying my breath. "What news?" He leaned against the fridge, folding his arms, watching me like a snake, waiting for its moment to strike. "I've decided it's time for you to move to a nice senior community. Somewhere quiet and safe. You've done enough here. Time to relax." The words hit me like a slap. My mouth went dry, and I felt the edges of my vision darken for a moment. But I forced myself to keep my face blank, to keep breathing. Before I could even react, he continued, already scrolling through his phone. "I've scheduled a few agents to come appraise the house. They'll be here this week. Don't bother cleaning. They'll see it as is." I swallowed so hard it hurt. My fists curled into tight knots at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every dish at the wall. But I didn't. I forced a smile, one so sweet it almost made me sick. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice trembling on purpose like I was too weak to fight. "When do they come?" His eyes gleamed with triumph. "Tomorrow morning." He strutted away, humming that same tuneless melody he always did when he thought he'd won. That evening, real estate agents paraded through my home, strangers with polished shoes and clipped voices, walking through my memories like they were stepping over garbage. They praised the good bones of the house while picking apart my old curtains and calling the garden dated. I was forced to serve them cookies, pouring tea with my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled it on their expensive suits. I overheard him on the phone with his girlfriend later, bragging, "She'll be gone soon. I'll put her in some cheap nursing place. Finally, I'll be free of her pathetic sob stories." I almost collapsed on the kitchen floor. My knees gave out, but I caught myself on the counter just in time. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My chest ached so deeply I thought I might faint. But through the nausea and shaking, I felt something else rise. A rage so powerful, it cleared every cobweb in my mind. In that moment, I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. I stared out at my roses under the moonlight. "You think I'm weak? You think I'll go quietly?" I stood there, trembling, my mind already turning like gears in an old clock. Let them think they had me cornered. Let them underestimate the quiet old woman with her journal and her tea. Tomorrow he would learn what happens when you push a woman who has nothing left to lose. That night, after the agents had left and the house finally fell silent, I sat at the kitchen table with my floral journal open in front of me. The pages were smudged with tears, ink blurred in places from nights I thought my heart might give out. Tonight, though, I wasn't crying. I read each entry slowly, one by one. The dates he came home late, the missing documents, the phone calls I overheard, the cruel words he thought I wouldn't catch. I traced every line like a map out of a nightmare. As I turned the pages, something inside me clicked into place. Each word I had written wasn't just pain anymore, it was evidence, armor. A story I had documented with the kind of care I used to reserve for birthday cakes and homemade costumes. I let out a long, shaky breath, the kind of breath you take when you finally stop drowning. The woman who once begged for his affection, who kept quiet to keep the peace, she was gone. I felt her leave me as surely as if a ghost had slipped through the door and into the night. I pressed my hand flat on the last page and whispered to myself, "You are not afraid anymore." I stood up, feeling the old ache in my knees, but tonight it didn't stop me. I moved through the darkened house, turning off lights, closing doors, moving as quietly as I used to when he was a baby, and I didn't want to wake him. In my bedroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was thinner now, lines mapped across my face, my shoulders stooped from years of carrying burdens no one saw. But my eyes looked alive, fierce. I saw a woman who had been used, humiliated, made to believe she was worthless, and who was still here, still standing. I turned away from the mirror, closed my journal, and placed it back in its hiding spot. I knew tomorrow would bring more humiliations, more threats, more schemes. But for the first time, I wasn't bracing for them. I was waiting for them. Because each insult, each push, would only give me more fuel. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the sky still heavy with stars. I felt a calmness in my bones, like the hush right before a storm. I brewed my tea, the soft clink of the spoon in the mug steadying my nerves. I knew what I had to do. I took out the small folder the lawyer had given me and began to copy every single email, text, and note I had gathered. Every slip of his tongue, every suspicious appointment he tried to hide from me. I documented it all, line by line. I set up a secret email account on my old laptop. It took me half the morning because my hands were shaking and I kept typing the password wrong. But eventually, I sent everything to the lawyer in one long, heavy file. After I pressed send, I sat back in my chair, my whole body trembling, as if I had just finished running a marathon. I pressed my palms together and took a shaky breath. Then, as if nothing happened, I went into the kitchen and started baking his favorite pie. Apple and cinnamon, the same one I used to make on his birthdays, the one he used to say, tasted like home. I rolled the dough carefully, humming under my breath. Each slice of apple felt like a silent promise. When he came home that evening, he barely looked at me. He dropped his shoes in the hallway and barked out, "What's for dinner?" I turned around slowly, wiping flour off my hands, and gave him a sweet, almost shy smile. "Your favorite?" I said. He raised an eyebrow, surprised but pleased. "About time you did something right," he muttered, slumping onto the couch. I watched him. Every movement, every careless flick of his wrist. He thought I was falling back in line. He thought I had finally accepted my place. But in that kitchen, while the pie baked and filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and sugar, my mind was somewhere else. I was imagining the lawyer filing the preliminary injunctions, the slow gears of justice starting to turn in my favor. I pictured my case file growing thicker by the hour, each piece of evidence another nail in the coffin of his scheme. By the time I set the pie in front of him, my smile was so perfect it almost hurt my own face. He took a big bite and sighed. "See, Ma? This is all you're good for." That evening, after he had stuffed himself with pie and fallen asleep in front of the TV like a spoiled king, I slipped outside into the garden. The moon was high, casting silver shadows across my roses. The petals looked almost translucent in the night air, fragile but defiant, standing tall even in the dark. I sank onto the little wooden bench, the one my husband built me the first year we moved in. It creaked under my weight, as if greeting an old friend. I pressed my hands together and let the silence wash over me. I thought about all the nights I had spent out here worrying about bills, praying he'd get home safe, praying he'd find his way in life. I used to tell myself that if I just loved him enough, he would learn to love me back the same way. But tonight, under that pale moon, I saw the truth as clear as the stars above me. He never valued me. He never valued the home I built or the sacrifices I made. He only valued the control, the power I handed to him over the years, piece by piece. My love had become a leash, and I had willingly slipped it around my own neck. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt a sob crawl up my throat. I didn't fight it this time. I let it rise, hot and raw, tears spilling down my cheeks in silent rivers. They weren't tears of defeat. They weren't the kind of tears that came from begging someone to stay. These were tears of release, of finally letting go of the illusion that he ever saw me as more than a means to an end. The next morning, I rose before sunrise. The house was quiet, only the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, gathering the last pieces of my plan. I met with the lawyer again that day. He looked up from the stack of documents I had sent him, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "It's time," he said simply. He explained that he had secured a court injunction. Officers were ready to intervene if my son attempted any fraudulent sale or forced removal. All the evidence I had gathered, my journals, the missing documents, his messages, it was enough. As he spoke, I felt a strange calm wash over me, like the moment right before a storm breaks, when the air is heavy and still. We planned everything down to the minute. The lawyer would notify the police at the precise moment the final sale meeting was scheduled, the meeting my son thought would mark his ultimate triumph. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. I practiced the words I would say when it all came crashing down on him. At first, my voice shook, the words catching in my throat. But the more I spoke, the clearer they became. Each repetition stripped away another layer of fear. I watched my reflection, studying the lines in my face, the tired eyes that had learned to hide so much pain. And then I saw it, the flicker of something fierce, something unstoppable. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin. "You did this to yourself," I whispered. Over and over again, I said it until my voice felt like iron. Meanwhile, in the living room, he was oblivious. He sat on the couch, calling agents, arranging the, quote, final signatures. His laughter carried down the hallway, a sharp, arrogant sound that no longer pierced me the way it used to. He thought he was just days away from victory, from stuffing me into some cheap senior facility and pocketing the sale money. But he didn't know the officers were already on standby. He didn't know I had filed every paper, protected every right. He didn't know I had already taken back everything he thought he had stolen. As I stood there rehearsing, my heart beat steady and strong. The old terror was gone. I wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. I was my own rescue. By the time I finally went to bed, the stars were fading. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to the new morning slowly unfold. I felt something different inside me. Not hope. Something stronger. Certainty. Tomorrow, he would see the woman he thought he had broken. And tomorrow, he would learn that quiet does not mean powerless. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, heart already pounding like a drumbeat deep in my ribs. I dressed slowly, carefully, a soft blue cardigan, my nicest earrings, the ones I had saved for church. I wanted to look composed. I wanted him to see the woman he had underestimated, standing tall, unshaken. I went to the kitchen and brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea. My hands were steady now, almost unnaturally calm. I carried the mug to the table, sat down, and waited. Through the window, I could see the roses swaying lightly in the early breeze. Even they looked ready, as if they knew this was the day. He came stumbling into the kitchen, half-dressed, papers clutched in his hands. His hair was unkempt, eyes wild with excitement and greed. "Today's the big day, Ma," he announced, laughing, waving the forged documents as if they were party balloons. "Last few signatures, and this place is mine. You'll be out by next week. You should start packing your little knitting projects." I took a sip of my tea, the warmth sliding down my throat, like a final act of comfort before the storm. I nodded slowly, almost kindly. "Of course," I said softly. "Today is a big day." He snorted and turned away, muttering something to himself about moving boxes and listing prices. And then it came. A firm knock at the door. His head snapped up. He turned toward me, confused at first, like a child caught stealing candy. I didn't move. I simply set my tea down and folded my hands neatly in my lap. The knock came again, harder now. He stomped to the door and yanked it open. And there they were, 2 officers, standing tall, serious, authoritative. Behind them, the lawyer stood with a thick folder clutched to his chest, his expression grave but steady. "What is this?" my son stammered, his voice shooting up like a scared teenager's. "This must be some mistake." The officers stepped forward, presenting the injunction papers. One of them began reading aloud, each word slicing the air clean and sharp. My son's face drained of color, his jaw trembling. "No, no, this is my house. She gave it to me. She's senile. She's—" I stood slowly, smoothing my cardigan, and walked to the doorway. He turned toward me, eyes wide and frantic now. "Ma, tell them, this is all a mistake." I met his eyes, and in that moment, all the years of humiliation, all the years of bending and swallowing my pride, vanished. I felt taller than I ever had before. I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice low and calm. "I did nothing, my dear. You did it all to yourself." His mouth fell open. A strangled sound caught in his throat. The officers stepped forward, guiding him out gently but firmly. As they led him down the walkway, neighbors started to peek from behind curtains. A few gasps echoed from across the street. I didn't flinch. I didn't chase after him. I didn't plead or cry. I just stood in my doorway, the early sun lighting up my face, my roses swaying proudly at my side. Inside me, there was no chaos, no trembling, only a quiet, resolute certainty. The day had come, and I was ready. As they pulled him toward the police car, he twisted in their grip, face contorted in a way I had never seen before. A mixture of shock, rage, and a desperate, childlike fear that almost made me pity him. Almost. He thrashed against their hold, his voice cracking, shrill, echoing down the street. "How could you do this to your own son?" he screamed. "I'm your blood, your son. You're nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing." I stepped forward slowly, my hands calm at my sides. The whole neighborhood was watching now, faces pressed against windows, some stepping out onto porches, mouths hanging open. I met his eyes, the eyes I once wiped tears from, the eyes I once trusted more than my own reflection. I tilted my head slightly, as if considering his words, and then I spoke. My voice was so soft it seemed to hush the entire street. "I did nothing," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You did it all to yourself." His face crumpled, lips trembling as if he was about to form another excuse, another lie. But no words came out, only a small guttural sound of disbelief. The officers led him down the path, and for a brief second he looked back at me. That glance was different. There was no power left, no arrogance. Only the raw, horrified realization of what he had truly lost. I stood tall in the doorway, watching them disappear. My neighbors stayed frozen, their shocked whispers floating toward me on the breeze. I felt no urge to turn away, no need to hide my tears. Because there were none. He thought I would beg, that I would crumble under the shame of exposing our family's ugliness. But I wasn't ashamed. What is love without respect? It is a hollow cage, and I had just broken free. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the sun warm my face. I listened to the roses rustling behind me. A quiet applause from the only witnesses that mattered. When I opened my eyes again, I felt lighter. Like I had set down a burden I didn't realize I had been carrying my entire life. I turned and stepped back inside my home, shutting the door behind me with a gentle, final click. I stood in the hallway, the door still humming slightly from where I had closed it. My breathing was calm, steady, but inside, something felt unfinished, like a wound that hadn't yet finished bleeding. I turned to find the lawyer standing in my living room. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part respect, part sorrow, part something else entirely. "There's something else," he said carefully, as if stepping around broken glass. My stomach dropped. I steadied myself against the wall. "What is it?" He took a breath, then opened the thick folder he had been clutching all morning. From inside, he pulled out another set of papers. Legal documents. My signature, or what looked like it. "He didn't just forge the deed," he said, voice low. "He also forged an updated will. He was planning to declare you mentally incompetent next month. After that, he would have gained full legal control of all your assets and rights, not just the house." For a moment, the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I felt my knees weaken, my mouth go dry. I reached out, gripping the edge of the hallway table, the old vase on top of it rattling softly. "Mentally incompetent," I repeated, barely above a whisper. I thought of all the times he called me forgetful, the times he joked about my old brain, how he insisted on handling the bills so I wouldn't get confused. Every small humiliation, every gaslight slipped into daily life, all of it had been building to this. The lawyer's voice softened. "If he had succeeded, you would have lost everything. Your home, your rights to decide where you lived, even your ability to access your own money. You would have been under his thumb completely." My fingers curled around the table edge until my knuckles went white. My head dropped, and for a second, the old shame threatened to rise, that creeping voice telling me it was my fault for loving too much, for giving too easily. But then, something else rose up instead. A fire that roared through my veins, flooding out every ounce of weakness left inside me. I straightened slowly, my spine tall and rigid, my shoulders set. Outside, I heard the neighbors murmuring louder, voices blending into a dull roar as they pieced together the truth. Some sounded disgusted, some shocked, some pitying. But none of that mattered. He had planned to erase me, to bury me alive inside my own mind, my own home. And now everyone would know exactly who he was, and who I had always been. I met the lawyer's eyes, and for the first time, I saw pride reflected there. He nodded slightly, as if silently acknowledging the weight of what I had just survived. I took a long, shaking breath. "Thank you," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "For helping me save myself." The lawyer closed the folder gently. "It wasn't just me," he said. "You did the hardest part. You chose to fight." I turned then, my gaze sweeping over my living room, the quiet photographs on the mantel, the old armchair, the teacup still resting where I left it. He had tried to erase me, but I was still here. My neighbors had fully spilled into the street now, forming tight, gossiping knots. Phones hovered in the air, recording every second like crows circling something freshly dead. I stood at the top of the steps, my hands calm at my sides. My cardigan moved lightly in the breeze, and I realized I felt no need to smooth it down, no urge to shrink or hide. My son was being led toward the car, his head jerking wildly from side to side. I could hear him shouting over the low murmur of the crowd. "She's crazy! She's making this up! I'm her son. She's lying!" But no one believed him now. The truth was out, slicing through his words like a hot knife through butter. One woman I barely knew, the one who always scolded me for letting my garden look too wild, pressed her hand to her chest and shook her head in disgust. Another neighbor covered her mouth, eyes wide and wet, as if she couldn't decide whether to cry or gasp. Local news vans began rolling in, cameras bobbing as they jogged across the lawn. I saw reporters straightening their hair, fixing their microphones, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal. A young reporter sprinted up to me, shoving a microphone into my face. "Ma'am, can you comment on what happened? Did you know your son was planning this? How do you feel now?" I turned toward her slowly, my gaze steady, my mouth set in a line sharp enough to cut glass. For a moment I considered answering. But then I simply shook my head once, firm and final. I turned away and walked down the steps toward my roses. The petals shimmered in the sun, red and pink and soft. And yet, I had never seen them look stronger. I reached out and touched one, my fingers brushing the delicate edge. The thorns pressed lightly against my palm, a quiet reminder of what strength really looked like. Behind me, the crowd kept buzzing, a rising storm of whispers and camera clicks. Police lights flashed red and blue against the front of my house, painting it in sudden, violent colors. And through it all, I stood in my garden, alone but whole, breathing in the morning air as if for the first time in years. For once, I felt no pressure to explain, to justify, to beg for understanding. They could record, gossip, judge, but they couldn't touch me anymore. I glanced back at the house, my sanctuary reclaimed. And then I turned back to the roses and smiled, feeling more powerful than I had ever felt in my life.